You're listening to the Kobo Writing Life podcast, where we bring you insights and inspiration for growing your self-publishing business. We're your hosts. I'm Joni, author engagement specialist at Kobo Writing Life.
And I'm Rachel, the author engagement coordinator at Kobo Writing Life. In this week's episode, Joni and Deandra sat down with debut author Zakiya Dalila Harris to discuss her book, The Other Black Girl.
Yeah, this was a really good interview. So Deandra, you've all met from a couple of weeks ago. She was a guest on the podcast. But on this particular day, Steph was sick, and I asked Deandra to jump in and co-interview with me because it was Deandra who had read an advanced copy of the book and told us, you need to interview the author. The book is fantastic. So that explains the hosting situation here. But Rachel, I'm excited for you to read this book because I feel like it's right up your alley. It's really, really good.
I cannot wait to read it. It sounds like it's right up my alley, and it comes out next week, June 1st. I will be there getting a copy.
Yay. So Rachel and I have both interned in the editorial departments of Penguin Random House in Canada, and the book is set in the editorial department of a big publishing house in New York. And it's really fun. Like, I think everyone kind of enjoys those peek behind the scenes. It's like we've talked before about reading about Condé Nast and those kind of big, like, New York media world. So that's fun. It's also a bit of a thriller. It's a really, really engaging story. Don't want to give any spoilers, so we're not going to talk about it too much, but we spoke to the author about why she thought this was an important story to tell. She also worked in New York publishing. She talks about her general journey to writing and publishing and how it was going from the industry side to being on the author side of things. We also talked to her a little bit about the adaptation for TV, which is coming up. So it's a great interview. It's a great book. If you stick around to the end, we're going to include a little audio excerpt from the audiobook as well. So stay tuned, and we hope you enjoy the interview. Thanks so much for joining us, Zakiya.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here with you both.
We're very excited to talk to you. We both loved your book.
Thank you.
To start off, would you mind introducing yourself for our listeners and telling us a little bit about your debut?
Sure. My name is Zakiya Dalila Harris, and I'm the author of The Other Black Girl. The Other Black Girl follows Noah Rogers, who is a young editorial assistant who works at Wagner Books, a prestigious New York City publishing house. She's been the only Black person working at Wagner for the last 2 years or so. So she's very excited when Hazel, another young Black woman, starts working with her too. But very quickly, things in the office get very weird. I'll just say that. And Noah begins to wonder if Hazel is a friend or a foe. And intertwined with Noah's story are the stories of 3 other Black women who have all chosen very different paths in life, but all of these women are bound by a secret that has implications for not just them, but for Black people all over the world. And so I am 28 years old. I wrote this book at the end of my time working in publishing a couple years ago. I was an editorial assistant at Penguin Random House. And then promoted to assistant editor, actually. And I had been there for a few years, really enjoyed editing, always thought at some point I would become an editor, be the Black editor, if you will. Toni Morrison was often in my mind when I was working in publishing, since she was at Random House many years before. But at the same time, I was also noticing just how there weren't any other people who looked like me on my floor. I mean, there was one editor, a Black man who worked as an editor at my imprint. But other than that, it was just me. And I definitely wondered about that. I would look at the table and I would think, you know, how awesome it would be to see other faces that looked like mine, especially younger people. Because at the end of the day, you know, a lot of us, and I say us Black people, but also just BIPOC people, we aren't able to kind of feel like we're comfortable in these spaces. Because there aren't many of us and we don't feel like we can move up and we end up leaving. And so I was thinking about all of these things when I was writing Noah and just kind of really wanted to express, you know, this drive that someone who's young and wants to succeed in this business has, but at the same time, why they might not necessarily feel comfortable still being there. And yeah, just looking at the microaggressions, publishing as a whole, but then also just corporate society as a whole and how toxic workplaces like that can be for a person.
What was it like for you to go from working behind the scenes in a publishing house to then going to the author side of things? Were you still working in editorial when you started writing?
Yeah, so I started writing this like I said, toward the end of my time there, I had just been promoted to an assistant editor, and I knew I was supposed to be really excited because I was given this book to work on, like my own book, which is huge. And I just remember going back to my desk and starting to cry because I was like, because I'd also had this dream of becoming a writer at the same time. Like, and those two things I think can work for people. But I think for me, like I had moved to the city a few years earlier to do my MFA in nonfiction creative writing at the New School. I'd gotten my degree. And, then I got this job in publishing thinking, okay, great. Like I'm still in the book world, but there's such different things and just such different muscles. And I think it came to the point where I was like, if I take on this book as an assistant editor, I'm going to have to give up my own dream. And because I really wanted to treat the author of the book that I'd been assigned the way I would want to be treated, right? So like I knew if I was looking over my shoulder at my own work, which is what I was starting to do more so, I wouldn't be giving his work the attention it deserved. And so, yeah, I had this idea for the book in January 2019. I was literally at the office. I ran into another Black woman in the bathroom, and I remember being so shook at seeing her because I knew I was the only Black woman on the floor, and we didn't exchange any moment, even though I was like trying to catch her eye. And, it's the bathroom, so I get it. Totally fine. But I went back to my desk and was thinking about this moment of like, why was I so excited to chat with her? And then why didn't she chat with me? And then am I overthinking all of this? And the idea for this book came into my head just of like, what if there's a woman like named Nella, like me, who's been working in publishing, been the only one for years, is starved for contact with a Black person. And when they finally get that at the office of a peer, rather than, because in publishing, there's also, I noticed like a lot of the people of color are not working as a certain editorial. They're working at the front desk. They're the mail people. They're the wonderful messenger people, the IT, like, so I wanted to also get at that too, of like the differing levels of class in publishing too. So yeah, I have this idea for these Nella working in this white workspace, and then another Black person comes in, and it just is weird. Like things just happen that were not happening before to Nella. And yeah, it definitely took off much more for me than I expected, but I had so much fun just writing into their lives, expanding the world, and decided to quit after 2 months into it. And I picked up a job at a cupcake shop, which was actually really hard. I was like, this is going to be low stress. And no, frosting is very difficult. But I was able to do these part-time jobs and also get to write at the same time.
And what was your writing process like when you were working, decorating cupcakes during the day, writing it?
Yeah. I mean, I had to get there pretty early in the mornings. My partner and I lived deep in Brooklyn. Like it would take me more than an hour to get to work at the time that I had to get there. But I'm a morning person. So like I will usually wake up really early to finish something or write something in the morning. And so, yeah, I would get up at like 4 or 5, like get an hour or two of writing in, then go to work. Sometimes I'd stay and write at the cupcake shop afterwards. And then a few months into the summer, I ended up getting a job teaching creative writing at this nonprofit called Utopia. And I taught children creative writing, and I left the cupcake shop because I was like, this is actually so stressful that I don't know how to decorate a cupcake very well. And yeah, and I think it was good for me because teaching children was like going back to basics in so many ways for me. Like that's when I started loving writing. I was like 6 or 7. Had a diary. I don't know what I was writing about at 6. Probably how annoying I saw my classmates or friends or whatever. But yeah, I've always loved writing. So it was cool to get back to that and like the basics and what made me fall in love with storytelling.
I'm interested, how was the experience of doing an MFA for you? Because this is something that comes up a lot with authors, is whether or not they need to do it or how valuable it is.
Yeah, I mean, it's always hard. I've had a lot of people talk to me about MFA programs even before the book, because they are something that I mean, there's so many great things about them. And then there are, of course, the pitfalls, I mean, the student debt, like it can be very expensive and it's hard to find necessarily the program. There's so many things you want to look at, right? There's the faculty, there are the people who have gone there before. You want to work with someone who ideally has had experience with what you're writing about. And so there's that, but then of course, finding a place that will fund you is really hard to do. The location's important. So, I mean, I think for me, I went to the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And then I remember my senior year of college, I was like at home. I'm from Connecticut, just like my protagonist. And I remember sitting in a Panera and being like, what am I going to do for the rest of my life? As most college seniors do. And I knew I loved writing. And I was like, maybe I should just try applying for an MFA program. But the only program at the time that I found that I hadn't missed the deadline for was the New School. And I was like, well, we'll see what happens. And I applied to fiction and nonfiction, got waitlisted for fiction, and then got in for nonfiction. And I was at first pretty bummed. I was like, I've been writing fiction all my life. I just started writing nonfiction in college, but I actually really loved it and slowly kind of started to come up with ideas of what I wanted to write about. And then toward my second year, toward the thesis year of my MFA, I started writing mostly about my own experiences of being a young Black woman and a Black girl living in Connecticut. At the time when I was a kid, I was the only one. So a lot of my experiences ended up going into NELA, of just being called an Oreo, being told I sounded like a white girl, all of those things. And so I was really able to get it out in that MFA program, all of my personal essays and feelings and insecurities. And so I love that part. I do think it's hard though, because, I do have so many connections from it. And I do think how I got into publishing is actually through a New School connection. And I feel conflicted about the fact that, because I was very privileged enough to be able to do this program, I was able to get my foot in the door that way. And I kind of wish it wasn't that way. And it's not always that way, but I do feel that at the end of the day, that is really where a lot of the best stuff of the MFA comes from, is the connections, which are really important. But then also I would be remiss not to add that two of my first readers were my good friends from my MFA program. So those are just the most amazing things that you can't possibly, you can find those in other ways, but the MFA program really did that for me. So I could go on about MFA. Sorry.
No, it sounds like you had a really positive experience with it, which is awesome.
Yeah. And I know not everyone is that way. I think timing plays such a big part of it. And again, if you don't have a group of people who totally are engaging with your work on the level that you want your work to be engaged with, it can be frustrating and it can feel like a waste of time and money in a way. And there's just no way of knowing. I guess it's just life. But yeah.
Because your MFA was in nonfiction, did you think going out of it that when you did publish a book, it would be nonfiction? And did it kind of surprise you when you got this idea in your head and started writing this thriller instead?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. I think I always kind of thought I would go back to nonfiction. And when I worked in publishing, I worked for an amazing editor who edited mostly nonfiction, and then another wonderful editor who edited mostly fiction. So I actually literally had access to seeing how both books are made, which was really awesome. Nonfiction, though, I definitely saw a lot more of how there's just so much work involved. There's work with fiction involved too, but I knew I'd want to I love doing research. I love looking through archives, newspaper articles, all those things. So I knew I'd want to do that kind of thing, but I hadn't necessarily found a topic that really grabbed me enough to want to do that. Definitely before I started writing this book, I was entertaining the idea of doing a PhD. But again, it's there's so many things that go into it and I don't want to rush figuring that out. So when this book idea came to me, I was whoa, this is just taking me in this direction. I love it. But I will say before this book, I had been working on and off on another book idea, also loosely inspired by research I had been doing. And for whatever reason, that book wasn't really taking off with me. I think I was getting too caught up in like, I don't know, I had an idea of what the book was in my head before I wrote it. And I think that idea was too rigid for me to make it happen the way, like the natural way that this book did, The Other Black Girl did. So, but yeah, to answer your question in a long way, I definitely was thinking about nonfiction, but fiction just came to me much more naturally, I think.
And for this book, so Joni and I both read it. And so to not give any spoilers to anyone listening that hasn't read it yet, did you always think the book was going to end the way it does? Or did that shift as you were writing it?
Yes, I love this question. You know, I did know, and I can say this, I say this proudly, even though I feel like people might not necessarily want to hear this. I definitely came in with this idea of an ending this way. I trying to think of the best way to say. I mean, I think it's okay for me to say that. So I'm a big horror movie fan. I'm a big thriller, sci-fi TV show fan, all of those things. And so I definitely grew up seeing endings that had question marks. And for some reason, The Blob comes to mind. At the very end, they think the Blob is in Antarctica, and it seems like everything's fine. And there's like the end, and then the words turn into a question mark, like literally on the screen, in the like 1950s sci-fi kind of creepy way. And I kind of feel like I love that vibe, because I feel like that is life, right? Like I feel like you never know what's going to happen. I think that also, realistically speaking, like my character experienced so many things throughout the book that the way that the book ends, it just felt like that made sense to me. I hope that's not giving too much away. But another ending I've been thinking about too, especially while talking to people about the ending of this book, is the ending of Get Out, and compared with the ending of Night of the Living Dead, where Night of the Living Dead ends in this very, you think he's gotten through this entire journey. The main Black protagonist has gotten through this huge, crazy zombie apocalypse, makes it to the morning, and ends up being shot in the very last moment of the movie because they think he's a zombie. Spoiler alert. Sorry. And of course, that compared with the ending of Get Out, where things could be a lot worse. Things could take a turn. He could be shot, but it's actually his friend who's in the cop car. So I don't know. I love just talking about endings and thinking about endings. And I really want this book to kind of make people consider, how could this have ended differently? Like, is it possible? What could Nella have done, or what could anyone have done to make this different, to make this end not the way it did? And so, yeah, I really wanted to inspire more conversations that way. And I'm also just like I'm not going to say bleak person, but I definitely like think about all the ways things can go wrong all the time. And like all the, okay, if this happens and this. And so Nella also being that way, it felt really fitting for me.
I really like Ira Levin's books, and I definitely
I
definitely got that vibe from yours. Like it's kind of, what did you say, 1950s horror? Like I think it's what, 50s, 70s. 60s.
Yeah. Yep.
Endings very, very well like that.
Stepford Wives was totally also, of course, obviously such a big inspiration for me for this book. I just remember seeing original movie adaptation a few years ago and being so shocked at how good it was. Like, I don't know. I feel like, I don't know if it's because the Nicole Kidman version I heard was awful. I didn't see the whole thing. Yeah. And so I kind of expected it to be this like, but no, I just remember feeling so taken aback and so terrified, and it was just done so well. And I think that idea of, women being used in this way, it was so brilliant, and it for sure inspired me when I was writing.
I'm curious, like once the book is out and people have had time to discuss it and everything, would you ever consider like giving people different alternate endings or talking about that? Or are you happy to let them speculate?
That's a really good question. I'm a big fan of alternate endings. Like one of my favorite books growing up was the Goosebumps books, specifically Give Yourself Goosebumps. And they have like, it was like just a series in which you could decide how the book ended. So I did love that. I mean, I definitely am so open to that because I don't know, I think it could be a good practice. I think that as long as when, we're coming up with these endings, I do want them to kind of make sense for Nella. I do see a world in which Malika and Owen have more of a hand in what happens in the ending too. And yeah, but I'll leave it at that because I have so many thoughts too about kind of where I see the book going beyond the ending. And I'd be curious to hear what other people think too, just about like, and because I think it comes down to like, do you see the good in people or are you more of a like kind of hopeless realist, I guess? That's not a thing. Hopeless romantic, hopeless realist.
Audio.
Yes.
We saw that the book is being adapted for television. Do you think that you'll be trying to keep it as similar to the book when it is adapted to TV? Or do you see, speaking of alternate endings and stuff, it going in a different direction?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really great question. It's been really fun working on this adaptation. At first I was a little, of course, as any writer is, I think, a little like, oof, like, how is this going to work? Like, this can't, like, I only see this, because when I was writing this, I only saw this book. I never had ideas of TV or movies. So I was really excited at the interest in adapting it. And the more I talked to people about it, I was like, oh yeah, like, we could get more into Nella's best friend's life. Like we could get more into Owen, her white boyfriend, like that relationship. Because I really wanted to give Nella a life, not just at Wagner, but outside of Wagner too, because she is a living human who gets her life sucks at work, but her life is awesome when she's not at work. She's got this circle of people around her. So yeah, the TV show, I think, will definitely be diving more into just her outer life and getting more into what makes her tick beyond just, her passive aggressive communications with her boss and her author. So yeah, the show will definitely have that. I think it'll be also perhaps a little more just spooky and thrillery, and Wagner itself will be an entity. It's Richard Wagner, the publisher at Wagner, is just such a larger than life character, and I feel like he could get more room. And then also Kendra Ray and Diana, there are just so many characters. I'm like listing them all. I'm like, who did I miss? Like Jesse, everybody has a backstory in my head, and it'll be really fun to fit into the show what we couldn't fit into the book, just because you really have to pick only so many lanes, and TV will just have so much more space to do more.
I'm very excited to see this.
Thank you.
Me too.
Thanks.
It must be so interesting as a writer, like you were saying, to delve deeper in these different ways you might not have thought about with like the backstory, like if there is parts of episodes or whatever where you're going into one character that you didn't get to explore in the book. So that must just be a totally different creative entity. Yeah. No, and, when I was writing the book, I mean, I started it in January 2019. My agent and I linked up in October, November of 2019. And then we put the book on sub in end of January 2020. Like the timeline is like such a crazy, like I still can't believe how fast it happened. Like I was not expecting any of that at all. But the book was changing the entire time. Like at least 10 different drafts happened in 2019 of the book, some vastly different from others. And so the book was constantly changing because conversations just like helped open it up more and more. Like, oh, okay. Like when the book started, it was just really Nella and Shawnee. And then it slowly started to expand bigger and bigger. And so I imagine the same thing with the show will happen, where it's like, oh, we can just pull at this thread. Like, so wait, what's under there? Oh, well, what's under there? Like, how does this all affect everything? It's been really fun and really fulfilling to see just people in another industry entirely to kind of get the book and see it in their own way. It just really shows me that
I don't know. Nella's got a lot to say about our world and our environment.
From a writing perspective, what was it like for you to have someone else, like as a former editor, what was it like for you to hand over your book to someone and then work on edits like that? Was there some kind of relinquishing of control there because you've done that job? Or was it enough?
Yeah, I mean, in a way, yes. But, I felt more relief than anything. My agent and I had been really had our heads together on this for a while. And then I had my head in it for a while. And so it felt good to have someone else in the circle, so to speak. My editor, Lindsay Sagnet at Atria, is incredible. And I also knew, the moment I met her, that she would just really dig into this book and make it all the things that I didn't think I could do on my own. She had worked on Gone Girl and had so many books under her belt that really just amazed me and thrilled me. And I really wanted this book to also do those things. But again, I when I wrote this, I didn't set out to write a thriller per se. I mean, I knew there would be this kind of underground group or some forces at play, but I really didn't have in mind this is going to be a thriller book, and so, or a sci-fi horror book. And so I really was excited to have someone who was looking at it in that way of how to really punch that up, because I knew that was something that I really wanted some help with. And I just loved it. I loved those conversations. To be treated like an author is just something that I've been dreaming about for years. So it was great.
Did you have any input into the cover design process? Because I'm obsessed with the covers that are being used for your book. They're so great.
Thank you. Yes. When I was writing this, I definitely knew I wanted some kind of Blackness to appear on the cover. Ideally, a Black person, but anything that even hinted at it. And that seems really vague. I knew when I saw it, I would know, and thankfully Atria was like, yes, totally. My agent and I sent them a list of Black artists, and they took the list, went through it, and found this artwork done by Timmy Coker, who is a Nigerian artist, I believe based in Texas now. And he had created this piece for Juneteenth, and it's called My Black is Beautiful. And it's this gorgeous image of the woman on the other Black girl cover. I think her head is flipped the other way. Her earring is a little different. The background is different, but it's still her. And it was a gorgeous piece of work. And they sent me, I have to clarify, but they sent me a version of the other Black girl cover with Timmy Coker's work on it. And then another version there was no picture on it, I think, but there was still some kind of element of Blackness on it, I believe. And I remember looking at both and being like, oh my God, they're so good. But this woman that Timmy Coker created just caught my eye, because the profile view, the royalty, it just felt so bold and so Black and beautiful. So I was just really excited about that. And they made the cover of my dreams. And I also just love the UK cover too. They were talking about the cover, I think in the summer of last year, which is so exciting. And we talked about, similar things. I really wanted there to be some kind of Black or hair related element on the covers, both covers. And so, yeah, I mean, I'm looking at it right now. The broken pic is just so, I just hear a sizzle. And they created this trailer that I think that's where the sizzle in my head's coming from now. But highly recommend everyone check out both of those book trailers. And yeah, they just look so gorgeous next to each other too. I can't get over it. I really feel like both of my publishers here and in the UK just nailed it.
Do you have much input into marketing your book? I don't know how much, what's expected from you as an author from trad publisher, but do you do a lot on social media, or is there a way that you prefer to interact with readers and readers?
Yeah. I wasn't a big social media person at all before the book happened. And so to suddenly be on social media, and then the pandemic happening when everyone was also again on social media, was a little daunting for me at first. But yeah, I mean, I've slowly been just finding what works for me and just posting honest posts, like just really, sharing the little things about the book of like my process of getting first pass pages, which to me, like, I mean, I've had so many moments during this journey that I've been like, whoa, now I'm like really an author, right? And so like the first one was, of course, selling the book. And then I think the second one was getting edits back, and then getting first pass pages, like holding them and seeing them laid out like that was such a amazing feeling. And so I've really been trying to just take things that excite me, that I'm really into, and then I talk to my partner about. I'm like, oh, this is great. And then I'm like, maybe other people might be into this too. So that's been my approach. But my team, both at Atria and Bloomsbury, and in Canada, have just been so amazing at getting the book out there, sharing it with people, sharing it with all kinds of readers who are into thrillers or horror or books written by Black women about Black women. Like, I feel like they have been able to find every possible reader, which has been amazing. And really, I think is what a lot of the heart of this book is about too, about publishing and how it can be more thoughtful and inclusive and trying to reach readers that are not the quote unquote typical reader, So it's been a dream just seeing where this book ends up, and I can't wait for it to come out.
I know, it's amazing that it's not even out yet, and there's a lot of buzz around it.
I know. I realized that as I'm saying this, I'm like, wait, it's also still. And so, I just feel really lucky, because it's like, to be honest, like having worked on the other side and also being on the other side now, I know not everyone gets this treatment. And, I just feel really thankful and also hopeful that this will open up so many more doors for other books that are not conventional, that are written by Black, Brown, BIPOC people, non-cis, just everybody who is not, quote unquote, the reader that's, I'm going to say the normal reader, but you know what I mean? The reader who is not often targeted by the publishing industry, not out of the publishing industry, but.
Yeah, it's a thing for sure.
Yeah.
Do you see publishing changing in the time that you've been in the publishing world?
I think so. I think it's hard because things are opening up, but I know a lot of the offices are still closed. So a lot of people are still remote. And I have a lot of really good friends still working in publishing, and still in touch with both of my bosses, just talking about everything happening. And I do think it's changing. I think that I'm loving seeing, just first of all, the fact that this book was received the way it was last year, even before the George Floyd protest. It was received in like a very open way. So I was really excited about that. And I'm hoping that with everything that's happened last year, everything happening right now, the last few weeks in America, I'm hoping that those conversations will just keep happening. And so I definitely feel that things are changing. I do hope that with, I see more diverse people being hired, especially at higher positions in publishing now. But my hope is that those conversations just keep happening, that we're talking not just about how to hire more people higher up, but also how to keep people of color. Because a lot of Nella's experience is, she's already there, but she's having a terrible time, and in a lot of ways. So how can we make these spaces actually feel more inclusive, not just look more inclusive? And I think once we've found a way to not necessarily answer that question, but just know we have to answer that question at some point, and just taking those little steps to be more mindful about hiring people who are not necessarily, don't have an Ivy League under their belt or don't have a certain program under their belt. And I say this as someone, of course, again, who got an MFA. I just feel like the more perspectives we have from all classes, from all areas of life, the better publishing will be, because then we will be actually creating books that are not just for one person or for XYZ, all people across the board, which I'm really hopeful. I'm hopeful that this will happen, but, I think one day at a time, and it will. One day.
If nothing else, they're going to follow the money. And so the more books come out that are super successful, then the more that we're going to realize there is an audience for this that we've been not catering to for decades.
Exactly. I know. And it's kind of crazy because I definitely have a lot of Black women say to me, like, this is the book I've been wanting. And like, there hasn't been a book like this. And I guess it baffles me that there hasn't. Like, I know that there are people who have tried to write books like this that don't fit into one specific genre, that are about a very specific person. I mean, The Other Black Girl has so many very specific Black music references and just Black cultural references that when I was writing it, I was like, I don't know if people are going to be into this or know what I'm talking about. Will this be a problem? But I have been having people talk to me about the hair and how they've learned so much about Black hair and like had no idea. And so, yeah, I mean, I really hope that, like you say, this will tell houses that you can publish a book that will speak directly to Black readers, but also speak to many other people as well. And also it's okay if it just speaks to Black readers, like specifically, like there are a lot of books that just speak to white readers, right? So yeah, just not setting a new standard, but just like opening up the board for all standards to be a thing.
Definitely. So one of our favorite questions to ask authors is, what have you been loving lately? It can be a book, TV show, podcast, anything that you've been enjoying lately?
Yes. Let's see. Okay. I'm looking at my bookshelf right now. I have to say the final revival of Opal and Nev by Donnie Walton. It came out a couple of weeks ago. Amazing book. If you love music, it's an exploration of this fictional Black woman who was like a punk rocker in the 70s, who, just has an amazing and very exciting career, but also has a very conflicting relationship with her white partner, music partner, who I believe is from the UK. So it's got a lot of music and fun and rock and just harrowing as well at the same time. So I love that book because I also love music personally. I also just finished The Black Kids by Christina Hammonds Reed. I'm so bad with author names. It's terrible. It came out last year and it's set in right around the time of the Rodney King riots. It's so good. And yes. And let's see. I have one more that I wanted to mention. Greenwich Park by Catherine Faulkner. I loved that book so much. It comes out, I believe, tomorrow in the UK. And now that I say it, I'm not sure if it's in Canada, but I know it's coming out from an S&S imprint sometime this year or next year, but it's such an amazing thriller set in Greenwich Park, and a woman who is pregnant starts to question just the people around her, is where I'll leave it at that. So I've been reading a lot of books that I've noticed now that I'm talking about them have to do with Black women, and let's see, Black women, a little bit of thriller, psychological thriller involved. So those have been my jam lately, but I'm very excited to get into some light beach reads and stuff as it gets warmer.
Awesome. We will share the links to those books that you mentioned. What are you working on? What can we expect from you next?
I am working on the TV adaptation. Has been taking up a lot of my time. It's been a lot of fun. And I am also part of a podcast for the American Writers Museum called Dead Writer Drama. And every month my co-host, Jennifer Christian Armstrong, and I talk to authors about dead writers and the drama that they experienced and created in some cases that we didn't necessarily learn about in high school, in elementary school. So it's just a very, very chill podcast from the American Writers Museum. And it's been really fun. I, again, mentioned I love history, love research. So very fun to talk about all the tea that they spilled back in the day.
What was the name of the podcast? Sorry, I missed it.
Dead Writer Drama.
Dead Writer Drama. Okay, awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Check it out.
I love that premise. That's so great.
Thank you. Yeah, our next one is going to be Ernest Hemingway and F. Scott Fitzgerald.
Amazing.
And where can readers find you online?
My Instagram handle is Zakiya Dalila Harris, and my Twitter handle is Zakiya_Harris.
Perfect. Okay, we will share those links, and we will also obviously share the link to your book for when it comes out in June. Thank you so much for coming on. This has been really great.
Thank you so much. This has been so much fun.
Thank you for listening to the Kobo Writing Life podcast. If you are interested in checking out Zakiya's book, we will have links to it in our show notes. And if you enjoyed this podcast, be sure to rate, review, and subscribe. For more tips on growing your self-publishing business, go to kobowritinglife.com and be sure to follow us on socials. We are at Kobo Writing Life on Twitter and Facebook, and at kobo.writing.life on Instagram. Now keep listening for a sneak peek excerpt of the audiobook of The Other Black Girl.
July 23rd, 2018. Wagner Books, Midtown Manhattan. The first sign was the smell of cocoa butter. When it initially crept around the wall of her cubicle, Nella was too busy filing a stack of pages at her desk, aligning each and every one so that the manuscript was perfectly flush. She was so intent on completing this task, Vera Perini needed everything to be flush, always, that she had the nerve to ignore the smell. Only when it inched up her nostrils and latched onto a deep part of her brain did she stop what she was doing and lift her head with sudden interest. It wasn't the scent alone that gave her pause. Nella Rogers was used to all kinds of uninvited smells creeping into her cubicle, usually terrible ones. Since she was merely an editorial assistant at Wagner Books, she had no private office and therefore no walls or windows. She and the other open space assistants were at the mercy of a hard-boiled egg or the passing of gas. They were often left to suffer the consequences for what felt like an hour afterward. Adjusting to such close proximity had been so difficult for Nella during her first few weeks at Wagner that she'd practiced breathing through her mouth even when it wasn't called for, like when she was deciding between granolas at the grocery store or when she was having sex with her boyfriend Owen. After about 3 months of failed self-training, she had broken down and purchased a lavender reed diffuser that had the words, "Just breathe," scrawled across its front in gold cursive letters. Its home was the far corner of her desk, where it sat just beneath the first edition of Kindred that Owen had given her shortly after they started dating. Nella eyed the gold foil letters and frowned. Could it have been the lavender diffuser she smelled? She inhaled again, craning her neck upward so that all she could see were the gray and white tiles that lined the ceiling. No, she'd been correct. That was cocoa butter, all right. And it wasn't just any cocoa butter. It was brown butter, her favorite brand of hair grease.
This episode was produced by Rachel Wharton and Joni DiPlacido. Deandra Lalonde was my guest co-host. Music was provided by Tearjerker. Editing is by Kelly Robotham. And huge thanks to Zakiya Dalila Harris for being our guest today. If you're ready to start your publishing journey, sign up today at kobo.com/writinglife. Until next time, happy writing.